Welcome back to another episode of Inside Access Control, sponsored by SIA. Very, very excited today to have someone who has been part of my background to come share today the story of where he's been and what he's doing now. So extremely pleased to have Amit Garg join me. Thank you very much for doing that and taking the time.
Lee, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you give people a little background on yourself, and then we can get into Tau Ventures and what you're doing now.
Sure. Lee and I know each other because I invested in a company that he was CEO for, and we ended up working for a couple of years together. So it's great to be in a different way collaborating now. I am co-managing partner and co-founder of Tau Ventures. It's a seed fund in Palo Alto, in the heart of Silicon Valley. We do three things: digital health, enterprise, and automation. Automation for us is cars, drones, robots. We come in typically when a company is just taking off, so somewhere between the journey of going from 0 to 1, and we really help our entrepreneurs with customers and investors, getting more business and getting more money. Happy to go that in more detail. My biography quickly: I've been in Silicon Valley now for 20 years. Before starting Tau Ventures in 2019, I was at another VC fund called Samsung Next Ventures, doing early stage investments. Before that, I was a co-founder of a company called Health IQ that helped people make better decisions on diet and fitness. That company has raised $120 million, is doing well. Before that, I was at Norvus Ventures, another VC fund, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, that's still around in the US, that has $10 billion of assets under management. Before that, I was in business school. Before that, at Google for many years as a product manager. And before that, I did my undergrad and master's at the intersection of life sciences and engineering. I'm a scientist and engineer by training, first and foremost.
Yeah, and a philanthropist too. Don't forget that
Oh
part of
boy,
what you do. You might as well mention that as
that's
well.
too kind. I took a backpack when I was 19, went into rural India, lived and worked there for a bit, and decided to do something about it. So came back to college and enlarged an organization, eventually took it out of college, and we crowdfunded and built infrastructure in this part of the world: a library, high school lab, and a hospital. The hospital serves a community of 100,000 people. It's called hospitalforhope.org. So thanks, Lee. Appreciate it.
Of course, you're a good man. So why don't we jump into? You mentioned the fund that you're now with, and if we look at the certain climate that you have right now, I thought it'd be timely. There's people that listen to this from the early stage side, and then we have actually some incumbents that even have some of the corporate VC side of the world. So if you were to look at it, typical investments in downtimes and crisis, right? So you've been in this long enough that you've seen the good, you've seen the bad. Can you provide any feedback or thoughts on, what is this climate, the opportunity, and also, the sort of watch out fors or the gotchas?
Oh boy, a lot has been written and said about this. So chances are anything I say is not going to be novel. But that said, I guess a couple of reminders that this is not the first, it's not the last crisis. There's many more coming, hopefully less in intensity. But there's lessons to be drawn from the past year. And one of them is startups are inherently risky. And managing your cash flow is absolutely crucial, even more so now in times of crisis. If you look at what happened in 2001, which was a big implosion of the tech industry, the companies that survived were the ones that created a lot of discipline internally. Also created a culture that was very much can do, we'll survive no matter what, we'll figure it out. And that's how you get a PayPal. They got essentially created during that crisis. That's how you get a Google. They were able to aggregate so many talented people around them, and they built a business model that made sense. So on a tactical level, what that means and what we told of our own portfolio companies is that, hey, look, cut your salaries for a little bit if you need to, or defer the salaries, or trade salary for equity, or find ways of changing the projects you're doing internally so that the ones that can generate revenues on a shorter term uh, get done
So
first. And
I appreciate the advice and the feedback and perspective on what people are doing that now. Actually, we didn't talk about this before, but maybe you could you give your view on this, because I know you're a deep thinker and you read a lot and you talk to people. But if you look at sort of what are your thoughts on the concept? There's some people that think everyone's going back to work. There's some people that's going to be phased. There's the whole movement of nobody's going back to the office. How do you view how this is going to roll out?
I think the question is answered with the question. It's where, because different parts of the U.S., different parts of the world are in different places right now, and even within the same geography, you have different realities, right? Somebody who depends on the physical presence to do their work, right? Like, let's say construction is living a very different reality than somebody who can do most of their work online, like a lot of knowledge workers. So I think it's very hard to have a view. It's impossible to have a view that's a blanket, because you have to consider both location and the type of work that you do. But with that said, at least when it comes to startups, at least when it comes to tech, which is the primary audience that's watching this video, our view at Tau Ventures is that normalcy, real normalcy, will take a while. Will, in fact, short of a vaccine, which in itself will take a while. To produce a vaccine, you need to do tests and you need to distribute, you need to manufacture, you need to distribute. All of that is a year at least. Short of a vaccine or short of herd immunity, which means that so many of us have been exposed, which also will take probably at least another year. Short of that, there's still going to be a psychological and a physical distancing to different levels. And if that affects your business, right, like some startups can cope with that pretty well, but some other startups, you need to deploy your product in a particular physical setting. I think you need to plan for that. That, look, real normalcy is not coming, very likely, we think, for the next 18 months. And the mitigant for that is, this is the good news for startups. A lot of startups have historically been ahead of the curve in terms of doing communication online, doing things over video, doing things over email, having virtual distributed teams. So I think doubling down on that does make sense. And for whatever can't be mitigated, figure out within your own business, how can you be creative about it? I'll give you an example from one of our portfolio companies. Their first product requires deployments in doctors' offices. That's on hold. The doctors' offices are not even open. So what they did is they started working on their second product earlier, and their second product is much more of a virtual product. So they were smart enough to say, okay, you know what? This is going to get slowed down. Let's go ahead with the second one and move it faster. So when the world comes back to normal, we'll actually have two products.
Very nice. Yeah, it's the ability. I think a lot of it comes down to the agility side and that ability to respond and pivot quickly. I mean, I'm seeing a handful of companies, specifically in the access control side, that before I would say that the products were seen as almost like nice to haves on top, especially in a slow moving industry that always sort of weighs more towards a security and conservatives type of like proven technologies, if you would, versus really not necessarily huge on experimentation, just because it's seen as a safety product more than anything else. But now, health sort of smashed that in the side. So before it was like, is it going to be about convenience or is it going to be about security? And then health just sort of like jabbed its way right in the middle of it to where
right. It's about life and death safety, right?
Correct. So now though, those products that were seen as like people counting for tenant experience, all of a sudden are about density and helping people get back to work based off of what in my opinion, what a lot of it is data visualization and the ability to make informed decisions, where historically before these offices were big, big dark buildings that you didn't know unless you showed up on site to actually see what's going on. Now, a lot of these tech companies are able to do that, and instantly overnight, they were able to pivot messaging, repackage the way they did some of the stuff, and they have a real big business. So it's interesting to see, and I think we'll start to see that. I actually am wondering though, if when you have things like this, it forces some of the incumbents as well to to maybe they're not first, but they're fast followers in a lot of ways. So they're going to start doing that, which is even more interesting to me, is that it gives more credence to what those startups are doing as well. So it boosts them up on that end. So there's this interesting, sort of network effects that happens on the messaging side that I think brings everybody along. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So on that, because since you had a background in the access control side when we worked together, and then also on the building smart products side from when you were at Samsung, very deep into that. What's your perception that you have from having somewhat 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the access control, smart building, commercial technology space?
Through Tau Ventures, we're very bullish on it because we think that smart cities, right, in general, that's the biggest theme. It's inevitable. It's in fact, the crisis has accelerated the move towards adopting these smart technologies. We actually just made our latest investment in a smart city company, and it's not quite access control, but it falls into the broader theme of smart cities. So let me just describe it quickly to you.
Please.
This company uses cameras on top of buses. As those buses weave around the city, they will detect traffic infractions. So it's safer for us as pedestrians, right? You don't want cars running all over you. You don't want cars parked illegally. You don't want cars going to bus-only lanes. You don't want cars going in front of school buses. That's the worst, right? It puts lives of kids at danger. And the cities are also hurting for revenues at this point. So this company can increase potentially the revenues of the city by 3x. So we invested with the view that this is a product that's very useful, that in this new reality will become even more necessary because you need to adopt these technologies. You're not going to have, in the US, I guess we don't have that many human beings directing traffic, but in other parts of the world you do. That is going to get more and more automated. And in fact, the smart cities for us falls under the rubric of automation in general, using robots to detect processes in manufacturing and making sure that they're more efficient or that there's less mistakes being made. We actually have an investment in that, and we have seen a number of companies in that. Or making sure that if you are opening and closing doors, right? Like this is what you and I worked at Lee, that you're able to, instead of having a physical guard who is letting people in and out, that you can actually have this person sitting in a room where they can control all of these things at scale in a bigger facility and get the analytics. It's far more scalable, it's far more efficient, right? Like all these technologies will get adopted now quicker. It's not that they weren't, it's that a crisis of this source accelerates things.
Yeah, we've been talking about there was phase changes that were happening before, and now there's a bunch of them that have been accelerated. Some have fallen off, but the ones that I think have the true value, again, gone from nice to haves to must to haves in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to now the life safety side of it, going beyond keeping bad people out. Now it's about keeping people safe, and health is a big aspect of that. So yeah, I can see how it's good, and they're all converging because we're in the U.S. especially, we're early into the smart smart cities side of things, of all of those parts and pieces. But if you look at them, like speaking even to the bus side, there's an aspect of access control that happens there at some point too. Though they enter gates, they enter buildings, they go into places, people enter them. Like there's a whole aspect of access control that those worlds are continuing to combine to where you go from your house to the bus to the office to the gym, whatever it might be. And that entire idea, maybe it's tied around identity and credentialing, but it is all based off of who you are, authenticating that, giving you access, and all those data points I think are important. So, and hopefully coming out of this, it accelerates some of that stuff to start to see it get adopted more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in some cases, to your point, other countries are far more ahead. You look at Singapore, right? It brands itself as a smart nation, smart city, smart nation. Self-driving cars, doors that open and close based on your identity and credentialing using your phones, like all of those things, they're not fully adopted there either, but they're further ahead. You look at East Asia in general, China, Korea, Taiwan, all of those countries have realized that if they want to make their societies more efficient, they need to embrace automation. And yes, all of this does destroy some jobs, but it also creates many other jobs. So there is a social change that happens that we haven't talked about at all. That's a whole another big
Yeah,
topic.
that's another. They could spend hours on sort of the societal impacts that go there because yeah, they're good and bad. I'm actually reading a book right now, the Autonomous Innovation, Autonomous Revolution is what it's called. And it's interesting because it talks about the effects, the good and the bad that come from it. Yeah, so there's a lot there, and maybe we'll set up another time to do that. But if people wanted to get a hold of you and find out more information about what you're doing, and you write a lot on LinkedIn, which is great too. So where's the best place people can find out more about you and the company?
Oh, well, taoventures.com. It has our portfolio, has our pretty pictures, and more importantly, the pretty pictures of all of our entrepreneurs and the great work that they're doing. Um, and also, as you mentioned, I publish a lot on LinkedIn. I share that content pretty widely. Anybody who wants to syndicate that is open to it. And if you have a business, a startup that is raising a seed that is within focus for what we do here at Tau Ventures, reach out to us. LinkedIn is a great way to do that.
Appreciate that. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy, and I appreciate it. It's always good to catch up with you.
Likewise, Lee, thank you so much for having me. And hi, and thank you to all the viewers.